Summary of The Courage to be Disliked by Ichiro Kishimi and Fumitake Koga. The philosophy that frees you from other people's expectations. Have you ever found yourself living to please others, constantly seeking acceptance, and avoiding disappointment, even if it costs you your own peace? Most people live trapped in a silent fear, the fear of rejection. It is precisely this invisible prison that the book, The Courage to be Disliked, by Ichiro Kishimi and Fumitake Koga, seeks to break. Based on the psychology of Alfred Adler, the author presents a powerful and liberating philosophy that all true freedom requires the courage to disappoint others' expectations. This summary will show you how to let go of the burdens of the past, heal emotional traumas, and finally live according to your own values. Prepare yourself, because understanding this can completely change the way you see yourself and the world. The story unfolds as a dialogue between an inquisitive young man and an experienced philosopher. The young man carries the same dilemma as many of us. He feels that life is unfair, that the past has wounded him, and that it is impossible to be happy when the world seems so complex and full of inequality. But the philosopher confronts him with a disconcerting, yet liberating idea. The world in reality is simple. It's not the world that is complicated. We are the ones who make it complicated. Every person lives through mental filters created by their experiences, fears, and expectations. These filters distort reality, turning what is simple into something full of noise, pain, and resistance. Adler called these the ego lenses. And the first step toward a free life is realizing that we can choose to see without them. The young man doesn't immediately believe it. After all, how can one accept that the pains and traumas of the past do not define who we are today? The philosopher responds that seeing life without filters is an act of courage. It takes courage to stop blaming the past, courage to abandon comfortable beliefs, and courage to take responsibility for your own present. Happiness, he says, is not a prize given to those who suffer, but a conscious decision that begins the exact moment we stop running from reality. This is one of Adler's deepest lessons. The world is not something to be conquered, but something to be understood. And suffering often comes not from life itself, but from the narratives we create about it. When the philosopher speaks of abandoning past causes, he proposes a rupture with the traditional view of Freud, the idea that we are prisoners of trauma. For Adler, the past does not determine the present. It is the present that determines the meaning of the past. In other words, it's not what happened to you that matters, but what you choose to do with it right now. How often do we use our wounds as emotional crutches to justify inertia? How often have we said, "I am this way because of my past"? Adler would say this is a comfortable self-deception. It hurts less to blame the past than to face the responsibility of changing. Imagine someone who avoids relationships because they were betrayed by a former partner. This person believes they cannot love because of the old disappointment. But, according to Adler, the real reason is different. They decided to avoid love so as not to risk getting hurt again. The trauma is not the cause. It is the justification. This simple inversion of logic changes everything. It takes the power away from the past and returns it to you. Change is simple, but it demands courage. And this is where the central theme of the book comes in. The courage to be disliked is not about being rude or cold, but about having the strength to be authentic, even if it bothers those who prefer you to be submissive. Adlerian psychology is practical, direct, and sometimes uncomfortable. It forces us to look in the mirror and admit that many of our sorrows are disguised choices. We choose to hold resentment. We choose to relive offenses. We choose to feed fears. And when we accept that we are the authors of our own emotions, we stop being victims and become protagonists. But pay attention. Don't confuse simplicity with ease. Facing emotional truth is painful, and the initial reflex is to resist. That is why the philosopher insists so much on courage, because it is the portal between suffering and freedom. At this point, it is important to remember, all transformation starts within. You don't need to wait for others to change, for the world to understand you, or for life to become perfect. Real change happens when you understand that the past is just an argument, not a sentence, and that happiness is not out there, but in the way you decide to interpret the now. Before we continue, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. This helps this content reach more people who are also looking for emotional liberation and personal growth. In the next part, we will dive into one of the most powerful concepts of Adlerian philosophy: why all human problems are, in reality, relationship problems, and how understanding this can cure the root of almost all suffering. The second great lesson of Iduwesnan. The courage to be disliked is that all human problems are fundamentally relationship problems. This statement seems simple, but it completely changes the way we understand suffering. Think of any pain you have ever felt: rejection, envy, humiliation, loneliness. All of them involve, in some way, other people. Even internal conflicts are born from comparison with the external world. According to Alfred Adler, if there were only one person on the planet, that person would have no problems. No disputes, no demands, no need to prove anything to anyone. It is the presence of the other that gives rise to conflict. And paradoxically, it is also the other that gives meaning to our existence. Happiness, therefore, is not the result of eliminating people from life, but of redefining the way we relate to them. The philosopher in the book explains to the young man that there are two types of relationships: those born from cooperation and those born from competition. The first creates connection. The second, resentment. When we constantly measure ourselves against others, we inevitably fall into the trap of inferiority. And this is where one of the most important concepts of the work arises: the inferiority complex. Adler did not see the feeling of inferiority as a bad thing. In fact, he believed it is the engine of human evolution. It is what makes us want to grow, learn, and improve. The problem is when this feeling transforms into justification. When we say, "I can't because I am inferior," we turn an impulse for growth into an excuse for stagnation. It is at this point that inferiority becomes a shield against responsibility. The young man in the book tries to defend himself by saying that it is natural to compare, that everyone does it. The philosopher then confronts him. The real problem is not the comparison, but its purpose. If you compare yourself to inspire yourself, you grow. If you compare yourself to prove your worth, you trap yourself. This subtle difference defines the boundary between progress and suffering, and it explains why so many talented people live in anguish. They are competing for an ideal that is not their own. And happiness, according to Adler, arises when we stop living to defeat others and start living to surpass ourselves. But there is an invisible obstacle on this path: the fear of rejection. Most people prefer to continue pleasing, yielding, and pretending, just to avoid criticism. The truth is that behind this behavior lies an old belief: if I am disliked, I will lose people's love. The title of the book hits this point with surgical precision. Having the courage to be disliked is accepting that you cannot control others' emotions or opinions. It is understanding that saying no is also an act of self-love. This courage is born not from selfishness, but from authenticity. Adler believed that true relationships only exist when there is no manipulation. And every time you act only to be accepted, someone is manipulating you, whether it's the other person or your own fear. Therefore, the philosopher teaches the young man to draw an invisible boundary called task separation. In simple terms, it means the following: there is what is your responsibility, and what is the responsibility of others. What you feel and choose is your task. What others think or expect is theirs. Confusing these boundaries is the cause of almost all human suffering. How many times have you worried about pleasing someone who would never be satisfied? How many times have you blamed yourself for not being able to fulfill impossible expectations? These are classic symptoms of a life without clear boundaries. Adler teaches that when we respect the limit between what is ours and what belongs to the other, we discover something precious: emotional freedom. The young man in the book then asks, "But what if people hate me for it?" The philosopher responds serenely, "If that happens, it is the price of freedom. It is the price of living according to what you believe. To be free is to accept that not everyone will like you. And that's okay. The search for approval is an elegant prison, but a prison nonetheless." Here enters one of the strongest points of the narrative. The moment the young man begins to understand that his life does not need to revolve around the gaze of others. When he finally grasps this, something shifts within him. He realizes that happiness is a choice that demands courage, and that the pain of rejection is temporary, but the pain of living a life that is not your own lasts forever. And it is at this moment that the philosopher proposes a challenge. Try, for just one day, to act as if you did not need anyone's approval. This simple experiment, if taken seriously, is transformative, because in it, you realize how much of your actions, your clothes, your words, and even your dreams were shaped to please someone else. Having the courage to be disliked is, therefore, the highest form of honesty with oneself. Before we move on to the conclusion, remember something essential. There is no healthy relationship without emotional freedom, and there is no emotional freedom without courage. If this content is making you reflect, hit the like button right now and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next summaries of transformative books like this one. Your interaction is the fuel that keeps this work alive. In Part 3, we will explore Adler's final lesson: how to discover the true meaning of life through contribution, and why helping others is the fastest path to freeing yourself from the ego, comparison, and unhappiness. We arrive at the deepest and most transformative part of the courage to be disliked. After understanding that freedom is born from courage, and that all human problems are, in essence, relationship problems, the final and highest lesson emerges. The true meaning of life is found when we contribute to the world. For Alfred Adler, every human being has a natural desire to feel useful, to have value. The problem is that most people confuse value with status, money, or recognition. That is why, even achieving external accomplishments, so many people continue to feel empty. They seek the meaning of life in approval, not in contribution. Adler calls this feeling community feeling, or social interest. The idea that each of us is part of something larger and only finds happiness when we begin to offer something to that whole. The philosopher explains to the young man that the root of the inferiority complex is precisely the loss of this sense of belonging. When someone believes the world is a competition, they isolate themselves emotionally. Instead of seeing others as fellow travelers, they begin to see them as rivals to be defeated. But here is the crucial point. This eternal comparison is the poison of happiness. The cure is simple, and yet revolutionary. See people as allies, not enemies. The young man, who until then saw himself as a victim of the world, begins to realize that he can choose a new way of relating to it. He can cooperate instead of competing. He can contribute instead of comparing himself. And it is at this moment that he understands what the philosopher was trying to say from the start. Life gains meaning when we stop living only for ourselves. When we act to improve the lives of others, even in small ways, something changes within us. The ego dissolves and the heart expands. Adler believed that no one is superior or inferior. Everyone has the same essential worth, the worth of existing and being able to contribute. When we offer something of ourselves, whether it's a gesture of kindness, advice, or a simple act of listening, we are affirming our own dignity. Contribution is the opposite of narcissism. It is what transforms freedom into purpose. But the book also brings a warning. Contributing does not mean self-denial. It is not giving up your own voice to please, nor sacrificing yourself in the name of false kindness. Contribution, in Adler's view, is acting with consciousness and intention. It is choosing to be part of the world without losing yourself. It is the balance between the I and the we. When we live this way, the fear of being rejected simply loses its power. Because you understand that your value does not depend on who accepts you, but on how much you add to the whole. And this is the ultimate freedom: being who you are, acting according to what you believe, and still choosing the collective good. This is true courage. It is not the courage to face the world, but the courage to face yourself, to face the gaze of others and remain at peace, even when you are not understood. At the end of the book, the young man finally realizes that being happy is not about living without problems, but knowing how to deal with them consciously. He understands that life is simple, and that we are the ones who make it complicated when we insist on living under the expectations of others. The philosopher then concludes the dialogue with a phrase that summarizes the entire Adlerian philosophy. True freedom is being able to say no, and still love anyway. This is the message. The courage to be disliked leaves for all of us. Living authentically is the only path to lasting happiness, and that authenticity only flourishes when we have the courage to disappoint, to disagree, to be different, and still keep our hearts open. So, if you've made it this far, remember, stop seeking approval and start seeking purpose. Don't live to be loved. Live to be free, and when you are free, love will come from those who truly matter. Did you like this summary? Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell to receive new summaries of books that transform the way we think, live, and grow. And if you want to continue this journey of self-discovery, watch the summary of The Power of Habit now, which will teach you to master the small actions that build big changes. Because freedom begins in the mind, And the next video might be the step your transformation was missing.